I'd like to call to order this meeting of Bethlehem City Council Finance Committee. I am J. William Reynolds, Chairman of the Finance Committee. The other committee members are Michael Cologne and Paige Van Wert. The clerk will please call the roll.
Mr. Reynolds,
Present.
Mr. Cologne,
Present.
Dr. Van Wert.
Present.
Thank you. There are 3 agenda items for tonight's meeting. The first agenda item is to review a proposed adjustment to the non-utility capital fund budget. The second agenda item is to review a proposed adjustment to the community development block grant home budget. And the third agenda item is to review a proposed bond issue to refund the 2012 Penvest sewer note. I will accept public comment on the agenda items at the beginning of the meeting with a 5-minute time limit. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on any of the agenda items tonight with a 5-minute time limit? There is no one who is signed up, but however, if you would wish to speak, you could please call 610-997-7963. We will pick up the line and allow you to speak. In the meantime, is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak that is here present at the meeting? Seeing none, hearing none, we will move on with our agenda items. And the first agenda item is I will call on a representative of the administration to review the proposed adjustment to the non-utility capital improvement fund.
So there's a couple items, but the first one we'll have Ms. Carner take care of, which is the pedestrian bridge feasibility study.
The pedestrian bridge feasibility study included a $140,000 project that we applied to. If you recall, we applied to Northampton County for funding where we received $60,000. We applied to the Commonwealth where we received $40,000. And so we needed to be able to match the county funding dollar for dollar. And we had pledged to commit $140,000 to that project. And so there was, forgive me, Mark, $70,000 or $80,000 we had returned to us from the Commonwealth from the Eastern Gateway project that they said we could spend on other park projects. And so that $40,000 transfer in this for this project comes from what had originally been state funds that were unable to be expended on the Eastern Gateway project and are now being directed to this one. So no general fund dollars are part of the project.
Thank you. Do committee members have any comments or questions? Seeing none, I would then just ask, and I'm not sure if this question is for Ms. Carner or Mr. Sivak or Mr. Evans. I may be wrong, but I thought when we had this conversation that there was that our matching funds for the Northampton grant was going to be DCNR funding.
Well, some of it is. So 40,000, so 60 is the county, 40 is DCNR state funding, and then the remaining 40 we ended up taking out of this Eastern Gateway funding that was unable to be expended on that project.
Did we sign a contract yet with anybody?
So we put out an RFP. You mean for a consultant?
Yes.
We did issue an RFP and have received responses and are just starting the process on reviewing those and engaging the community on how we're going to interview for a consultant for the project.
And did the responses include, I'm just trying to get an idea where this $140,000 came from, because I thought when we had originally assumed that it was going to be in like the 80 to 90 to 100 range.
So the mayor had talked to Lamont McClure and had engaged him on some additional funding, and he came through with 60. He was all over the place on the dollar amount that he was going to throw his support behind for this project. There was, I think, 40,000 talked about way back in that Rose Garden Eastern Gateway conversation at budget time as the city's pledge to the project, and then we were able to secure the 40,000. I have to be honest, I haven't touched the responses on the RFP, so I have no idea what dollar amount they've come in at.
So we don't know whether or not. So how do we know if 140 is enough or not enough? Or
that's what was committed to in the contract for Northampton County for the 60,000. So when we applied for funding and we knew what dollar amounts we had available to us, we leveraged it was a total amount of 140 based on the 40 from the city, the 40 that we were applying for from the Commonwealth, and the 60 that the county had said they'd support the project with.
So what's the process then if the pedestrian bridge study comes in at 100,000 or 120,000 or 115,000?
Well, you mean the process with whom? With us? We don't spend the money. Or do you mean with the county or the state? Essentially, to get the 60,000 from Northampton County, we have to spend 60,000, and that's a combined state funding match.
Okay,
So if we end up, let's say it comes in at 120, then there's still $20,000 available for presumably another parks project, something that was in line with the Eastern Gateway project, that funding that was returned to us.
I gotcha. Thank you. And I mean, I obviously support the study. I did think at some point that we had, and I'm not sure if it was you, Ms. Garner, or Ms. Heller, I thought we had talked about at some point that the DCNR money was going to be the only match that we needed for the Northampton County.
Well, we talked about, the uncertainty of that. And so the city had put the $40,000 behind it. And I think that was either Dr. Van Wert or Mr. Callahan's amendment at the time for that project. And so that's where the total dollar amount came from.
Okay.
But regardless, there's no city money in this project.
Other than the fact that we could use that $40,000 that we had been, the $40,000 we're using, we would be able to
That
use
was
for
a bit of-
something else.
The 70 or and change that we got returned to us was a bit of a surprise to us. We thought that we had to return that to the Eastern Gateway, project. And when the state kicked that back to us, that did give us the opportunity to spend those dollars.
I gotcha. So if we didn't get that $70,000 back from
We
the
would
Eastern-
expect the 40 that was amended in the budget the first time to be available for the project.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I guess the next one here is the tree replacement.
Mr. Elko.
Thank you. This is to request establishing a line item in urban forestry in the amount of $155,000. And that money is to come from the tree replace developers account to perform a project, a tree beautification project in the North Side Vision 2027 area, roughly bounded by West Laurel Street to the north, Broad to the south, Monocacy to the west, and Edge Street to the east. Basically, the work, we're calling it phase one. It calls for the removal of about 70 trees that are declining or diseased or dead. A planting of about 90 trees. Most of those would be replacement of the 70 removed, as well as some new ones. And then later on, there may be a phase two with less work involving about 20 trees. That was taken out of the scope in this phase because at those locations where there were issues with trees, they also had lifted sidewalks and what have you. So that's going to require more extensive work to repair the sidewalks in order to perform the work appropriately. But for now, we just need to establish a line item in urban forestry in the amount of $155 to accomplish this project by the end of the year.
Thank you. Do committee members have any comments or questions? Hearing none. I would.
I don't know, Cologne.
I'm
Amy,
sorry.
Mr.
I wasn't going to say anything.
Mr. Colon?
Thank you. Mr. Alcohol, just real quick, the fund that where this money's coming from being moved into, that's the one that developers put into when trees are removed, or
Correct.
what exactly, where does that money come from?
From developers, when they submit plans, if they're unable to comply with our ordinance in terms of requirements for planting and what have you, in lieu of that, there would be a sum of money that's required that they would have to escrow, and that money is to be utilized for tree type work like we're proposing to do here.
Understood. And if you don't have the figure with you now, can you or Mr. Stivak just forward us if we're moving $155,000 from that account, whatever the remaining balance is left in
Sure.
that account then?
Yeah, sure. I think there's 350 plus, but you may recall not too long ago, we moved 42 for urban forestry inventory, and now this 155. So in rough numbers, there's probably somewhere between 50 and 100 left at least, and there may be deposits pending yet.
Yeah, if you remember, Mr. Cologne, that was the one at the last finance meeting. Chairman Reynolds asked for an accounting of that escrow account, and I provided that, but I can provide it again. But I think that's right. After this, probably roughly about 150,000 will remain in that account.
Understood. Thank you for jogging my memory. Those were my only questions. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you. Any other questions from any committee members? Seeing none, I would, we'll move on to the third. We don't, I was going to do the motion after the animal shelter one.
Oh, right, I'm sorry.
Yeah, if we could just, we'll then move on to the next line item here.
Yeah, that would be for, as you probably are aware, the city has been working for quite some time on making an animal shelter. Originally, we had cited putting a brand new facility by the recycling center. The bids came in a lot more than what we had budgeted. We rescoped the project, and the latest site that was selected was to retrofit the control room down in the garage that used to be the water control room, to retrofit that for that purpose. There are quite a number of code requirements that had to be done in order to make it suitable for this purpose. Principally, the sprinkler system had to be installed. We had to replace the walls and ceiling, because when we put the cages in there, we'd have to hose them down and install drains. To make a long story short, even repurposing that room, when we got the bids, the lowest qualified bid came in around $130,000 plus. We only have remaining funds for this project, something on the order of 50,000 or so. So we're moving money from a number of places. This is one of them, $39,000, so we can fund this project and finally get it done for the animal shelter.
Thank you. Do any committee members have any comments or questions? Seeing none, I do not have any comments or questions. Before I ask for a motion and a second to recommend that council adopt an appropriate ordinance, I do want to recognize our controller, Mr. Yasso, is here. Mr. Yasso, I'm not sure if you wanted an opportunity to speak on any of the three items. Mr. Yasso?
So I'm just going to briefly speak about the pedestrian bridge study, and this is just pretty much an FYI for Finance Committee as well as council as a whole. I wanted to give the background because the grant agreement has been prepared and sent to my office for execution twice, and twice I have not signed it. So before you consider it, I want to at least fill you guys in. The first time was earlier in the year, soon after budget time, and the problem there was that matching funds was not recognized. So when I went to read through the contract, it didn't take me very long to see that there were matching funds required, yet there was none found in the budget book. There was no budget authorization, no accounts, anything for that. So I sent that back downstairs. They took it back. I then received it a month or so later, and at that time, the $40,000 showed up in the budget authorization signed off on by the administration in the form of the 2017 bond note. So now that $40,000 was going to be found through the borrowing money, and I found that inappropriate regardless. But more inappropriate was that the cover sheet to that agreement said no council action needed. Now, from a legal standpoint, I'm not saying that anything was done underhandedly or anything like that. Just as a reference point for council and for finance, just recently the administration came and asked all of you to amend the language in Article 121 to kind of get rid of some of the redundancies that the administration deals with, particularly that final approval by you guys. So every Friday when that email goes from Mark to Robert to Adam to you guys, to Adam to Robert to Mark, and adds that lead time. And I vouch for the administration, spoke to a lot of you about the vetting process that everything goes through before it gets to you, so that you felt good about eliminating that language, because the Law Bureau, the Purchasing Bureau, and the Controller's Office certainly have already done those things for you. So I wanted to use this as an example for all of you, because the reason that never got to you and never became one of those Friday emails was because it got stopped in the vetting process. So it's just a point of reference for all of you, as well as an FYI of what went on behind the scenes. So after I took it back the second time, said the bond money wasn't appropriate use, I didn't get an argument from the administration there. I said it needs to go to Finance Committee so that everything is on the table. Did not get an argument there. So here we are. It's in front of you now. I just wanted to give you guys the FYI before you considered it. If anyone has any questions.
Thank you. I have a question for, I don't know, Mr. Sivak or Mr. Evans. I guess I would just ask about what was the genesis of sending it. I take it that there's nothing that Mr. Yasso said that you would disagree with, though, as far as the process of the contract going to.
No, not at all. Everything he said is accurate.
So then what was it that led, why did the administration send it if there was the two times, the no matching funds, and then the second time having to do with the 2017 bond note?
I think at least one of the times the issue was it bypassed Eric and I by accident and went right up to the controller's office.
Yeah, that would have been the first time. That's where there was no budget authorization. No. And again, I don't think that was necessarily anything intentionally. I think it was just a oversight, something that's not really excusable for a mistake like that, but certainly an innocent mistake.
And then the second time, as he's, initially for the 40,000 match, we were going to use bond money, but after talking with George, he wasn't comfortable using bond money for a feasibility study. So, we said we would find another source, and that's where we found the Eastern Gateway source, which was, unrestricted funds sent back from the state. And then we amended the contract to reflect, that as the account we were using for the match.
I mean, so would you say you had a disagreement about whether or not bond funds could be used for this with Mr. Yasso?
I wouldn't say it was a disagreement. I mean, we thought it may be I think it's in the gray area as far as an eligible use, but because we had other funds available, and that happens from time to time, George or the deputy will come down when we're charging certain things to bond accounts, and they may ask if we could take it out of operating funds because they're not always sure it's quite a capital purchase, and we work with them all the time on that. And if we have the other resources, we generally will go that route.
Yeah, and that's all. Why I again thought it would be a good reference point for all of you, because those are the type of things that not just the controller's office, but when we go to talk to the administration and say, hey, this really is regular maintenance, or this is operating. This should not be coming out of our long-term borrowing. We're typically gonna work together, find an answer so that all those things are solved, and you don't see any of those on your Friday emails, because that stuff has all been taken care of.
Thank you, Mr. Yasso, and thank you for your diligence on this one. Do any committee members have any questions for Mr. Yasso or the administration? Seeing none, I will then accept a motion and a second to recommend that council adopt an appropriate ordinance to amend the general fund as it relates to these three line items.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Cologne, seconded by Dr. Van Wert. The clerk will call the roll on the motion.
Mr. Cologne,
Aye.
Dr. Van Wert. Dr. Van Wert,
Aye.
Mr. Reynolds,
Aye. Passes 3-0. An appropriate bill will be placed on the July 7th, 2020 council meeting agenda for first reading. We'll move on to agenda item number 2, proposed adjustment of the community development block grant home budget. I will call on a representative of the administration to review the proposed budget adjustment.
I'll review those with you. So this is the adjustment you typically see after we find out what our allocation is from the federal government. It's probably coming to you a little later with all the COVID stuff that's been going on. But what this does is brings in line both our CDBG and our home totals with what our allocation is. So in the fall, when we are presenting a budget to you and we're soliciting subrecipient requests, we're just projecting a dollar amount, and generally we're pretty good at coming in under, so that we've got a reprogram fund. So you can see with CDBG, we looked to our own expenses first and added dollars to both police overtime, program administration to stay within that 20% cap, and then our housing rehab grant and loan program. Some of the reasons for that is because obviously we want to make sure we're bringing as much money back to the city as we can, but also then if there is another project that goes over and we are not able to spend, we'll have a little more control over directing some of our own dollars to those projects. You'll notice there's a big swing in the home total. I have to be honest with you, I had accidentally, while presenting to council all of the recommendations, I had accidentally in the budget book at budget time put the amount requested as opposed to the amount we were supporting. And so you'll see the 223 number was originally part of the 2020 budget book, when really we were supporting a much smaller dollar amount. I think it was 75,000 at the time. So this is correcting that error. Again, every time council considered it via resolution or as part of our action plan, it was the correct dollar amount. It just was something I don't think any of obviously didn't catch, administration didn't catch. So again, we look to correcting the dollar amount for the land trust, coming with that 4% cap of our CACLV CHOTO funds, and then putting it into our own program admin and our own housing rehab grant loans.
Thank you. Do the committee members have any comments or questions? I just have a couple then, I guess, about CDBG in general. So then this is the money, this is not adjusting any of the money that we are getting, that we have learned that we're getting in 2020, correct?
Well, this is adjusting the normal allocation.
The normal allocation. I'm
We get in
talking
2020.
about the
CARES funding, no.
yeah.
CV, no. This is separate from that.
And do we know when what the timeline is for when we're going to receive that?
We're hoping to get a contract any day. We did upload, so there's a federal computer system that we upload our action plan and all of our documents that need to be signed. And so we did that 2 weeks ago. And we're hoping to get a contract any day for those funds.
And how much is that?
800,000 approximately.
Okay. And what's the timeline for council action on that 800,000? Do we need to take any
We took
action?
action on that already.
We took that.
We,
So
we
what's
did all of that already.
so what's the breakdown then about how we are planning on spending that 800,000?
So I don't have that off the top of my head. We put more money into economic development activities. I think there was 150,000 for that, and that's a broad category for things like if we wanted to offer more grants, or it's helping us with our parklets, for instance. Other economic development related items that are CDBG eligible. We put funding into nonprofit assistance. I think that was another 150,000. Do you guys remember the breakouts?
I remember seeing the memo, but I don't remember.
Yeah, and then so we put some funding into nonprofit assistance. We took some admin, which I believe was in the $160,000 amount. I'm sorry, I'd have to look it up and give it to you again.
Okay. Would it be possible for us to get a breakdown of what we?
That was at the last finance committee meeting, if I remember correctly, that we provided that. We amended the budget and we provided you with that breakdown at that time. I'll gladly do it again.
Yeah, I'm just
And it
curious.
was part of a resolution for the CARES Act.
I'm just curious about the breakdown a little bit more of the, like for the 150,000. I don't believe that what we had gotten was, have we made any of those awards yet or
The
no?
the only award or announcement we've made so far has been for a partnership with New Bethany for the eviction
Yeah.
conciliation program. So we're supporting them. I think we had 300,000 in total allocated for that, and we're supporting them with at least 200 plus some staff support.
Okay. Thank you.
And we did spend how much money on parklets? 40-some thousand at this point. Yeah. So when I say we haven't made commitments to third parties, that doesn't mean we haven't started to draw on those funds ourselves.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Did Mr. Yasta, did you want to add anything to this? Okay, seeing none, I would then ask a colleague to make a motion and a second to recommend that council adopt an appropriate ordinance to amend the CDBG budget.
I'll make the motion.
Motion made by Mr. Cologne,
Second.
seconded by Dr. Van Wert. The clerk will call the roll on the motion.
Mr. Cologne,
Aye.
Dr. Van Wert,
Aye.
Mr. Reynolds,
Aye. Passes 3-0. An appropriate bill will be placed on the July 7th, 2020 council meeting agenda for first reading. And our third agenda item here is proposed refunding of the 2012 Penvest notes. I will call on a representative from PFM Financial Advisors and/or the administration to discuss the proposed transaction.
All right, well, good evening. I believe everyone does have a copy of a handout with them or access to one. So I was just going to briefly go through that, just hitting on some of the highlights. But at a kind of very high level, you know, one of our jobs as the city's financial advisors to always be looking for potential ways to save some money by refinancing some of its existing debt. So to be clear, this evening, we're not talking about any kind of new money being added. This is solely refinancing. And also when we talk about refinancing, it's keeping the same structure of the transaction. So we're not stretching out the debt. We're not shortening the debt. We're basically keeping the same overall amortization, basically just going from a higher rate to a lower rate. So as we were kind of going through the city's debt portfolio, looking at general fund debt, sewer fund debt, water debt, the only one that came across our radar screen that is producing some kind of economic benefit is the Penvest loan related to the sewer fund. So that's the opportunity that we want to talk about this evening. And then if you want to move it forward, what the ordinance would pertain to here over the next couple meeting dates. So briefly on page 2, as far as a real brief market update. So through 2019 and through early 2020, we saw a pretty steady decline in long-term interest rates. And then you can see from the chart, interest rate chart on the prior page, once the pandemic hit, we saw a pretty substantial spike in the long-term interest rates, which is what we care about for this kind of borrowing possibility, not so much the short-term rates, but again, the longer-term rates. We saw that pretty large spike. Basically, the market shut down for a couple of weeks. We were not seeing very much activity at all. But now, pretty much since early April, the market has gotten back together, and we're getting a lot more transactions done, and the interest rates are back to where we thought that they should be. So overall, there's still a fair amount of volatility, but the rates are low, and it's an opportune time to at least be discussing this opportunity. So in the middle part of page 2 is the candidate. It's the 2012 Penvest loan. There's about $6.7 million outstanding on that. As with all Penvest loans, good interest rate on that debt, but just right now we're able to actually get a little bit lower. So the current interest rates is just a little bit over 3%. The call date is anytime, which means it's prepayable at any time with no penalty or any premium. And there's about 14 years left on the transaction. It goes out to April of 2034. And as I mentioned in point number 3, right now that Penvest loan is the only one that's producing savings that we're able to refinance on a tax exempt basis. And net of fees right now, the net bottom line that the city would realize in point number 4 is about 350,000 net savings. Now that's pretty much a right on, based on rates as of last week, I guess, when we put this handout together. So, we would have, if you do move this forward with the first reading this evening and the second reading in a couple of weeks, we do have a little bit of interest rate risk until we get to the point in time that we can lock in those rates. So this is just indicative, and it will be fluctuating with the market. I will say that 350,000 net savings is extremely efficient when we're talking about a transaction of this size. A lot of times, municipalities and local governments look to do this kind of refunding when there's about 2% net savings, and that's 2% of what's being refunded. So that would be close to 140, 150,000. So we're almost double that. So we're closer to 5% savings here. So assuming we can get it done at that level, very, very efficient. As far as the overall plan of finance, we have an RFP for underwriting services out on the street. We expect those to be coming back in the next day or two. That's one of obviously the underwriter. Those are the ones that ultimately set the rates. And so we're bidding out not only the interest rates, but also their fee as well. And as within the past, we would recommend the proposal that comes in with the most favorable terms and conditions. So again, we'll be getting those RFP responses back here in the next few days. We would be recommending a parameters ordinance like we've done in the past that gives us that flexibility to price after the second reading if you do decide to move it forward. And just like we've talked about in the past, again, even though this is about a $6.7 million transaction that we're looking to refinance, the parameters amount is going to be something a little bit larger than that, just to give us that flexibility, which we can talk about at that meeting if we get to it. So just, again, wanted to give you a heads up on that. But the main point is the purpose of the ordinance legally sets that we're only able to do this transaction to refund this Penvest loan, no other purpose, no other refunding purpose, no other new money purposes. The next couple pages just illustrates all the outstanding debt of the city. So I won't really get into this. It's kind of more for our purposes and your administration purposes. But the one page is just all the city's general fund debt. And then the next page, page number 4, is the page with some of the lease rental debt, which would be the sewer related debt and some parking debt and the Bethlehem Authority. We're focused on column 2 on page 4, which is the Penvest loan. Then real briefly on page 5, this is the current amortization shown on an annualized basis of the Penvest loan. It's paid on a monthly basis, but again, we're just showing it on an annual basis here. If we skip to page 7, this would be what the new bond issue would look like based on the rates that we assumed as of last week. So over on column 9, over on the right-hand side, shows how the net savings are falling into place, about 180,000 in 2020 and about 140,000 or so in 2021. And the rest is just miscellaneous kind of rounding each year thereafter. So again, showing about 350,000 of net savings. And then on page 8, just a kind of a high level illustration of the sources and uses. In the middle of the page where it says yield of the issue, this is showing a rate of just a little under 2%. So basically we're going from a 3% interest rate down to 2% interest rate with these indications and estimates, providing that net benefit to the city. And then lastly, on page 9 is just a real brief high-level timeline, kind of showing that if you do decide you want to move forward, this evening would be the first reading of the parameters ordinance. We're going to be having the rating call here in the next few days or so. Then July 21st would be the second reading. We'd get the credit rating sometime in the latter part of July, finalize some other documents, and look to price the bonds probably late July, assuming we're able to hit it at an opportune time, and then close about a month later. So happy to answer any questions you may have, but again, at a very sort of high level, this is just a refunding, just going from a higher rate to a lower rate, not changing the structure, not adding any other new money. After scouring the city's debt portfolio, this is really the only transaction right now that's making sense to do based on the current economic conditions.
Thank you. I don't know if the administration wanted to add anything to Mr. Shearer. No? Do the committee members have any comments or questions? Seeing none, I would turn to Mr. Yasso. Mr. Yasso, did you want to make any comments? When you take a look at this, it seems like it's pretty straightforward and it makes a lot of sense. I just have one general question, and that's for the administration. I also want to acknowledge Mr. Spurk has also joined us for the meeting. I want to thank him for joining the committee. How do we decide about, or what's the kind of general process that we decide about whether or not to look at these kind of refinancings? Do we call Mr. Shearer once a year, a couple times, or do you guys?
Yeah, more than a couple times a year, there's opportunities to look at what windows of opportunity are available. So we're not in constant touch with Scott, but Scott also does a great job of reaching out to us and let's take a look at the different parts. And as he mentioned earlier, we looked at general fund. There just were not any opportunities at this time, depending when the loan was closed, when it was callable. Even though the interest rates are very good right now, there just weren't any more. We wish there were, because it's always nice. All I have to do is, sign the paperwork and take the realization, in this case, of 5% of the amount financed, or $350,000 picked up real quick on not a real large loan balance. So the fact rates have been good in the last couple of years. We've sat and done this both through the water, with the sewer, as well as the general fund, and it's something we just, I guess, the standard practice to do with the rest of our budget reviews. We're looking at a way to find discretionary money, or money where we can save money when revenue becomes difficult, and we're trying to balance the budget. So it's always a nice when it is available, and this one happened to be. And when we knew the rates were moving back when the COVID all started moving down, and we started hearing these record lows, and right away we got in touch with Scott and said, okay, can you take a look at the portfolio? And they're very responsive. I want to always give a PFM a great reference, that they're always very good for us. Everything they give to us is valid. The numbers are always accurate. We find out when they go to closing, they're able to come through with what they say they're going to do. We find they realize the savings that you see in front of us. In the 10 years that we've been doing this, we haven't been surprised by what we get in the end. Once it does go to market, what they present is what they come through with.
Thank you, Mr. Evans, for the background. I will then accept a motion and a second to recommend that the proposal bond parameters ordinance to full council for consideration.
So moved.
Motion
Second.
by Dr. Van Wert, seconded by Mr. Cologne. The clerk will call the roll on the motion.
Mr. Cologne,
Aye.
Dr. Van Wert,
Aye.
Mr. Reynolds,
Aye. Passes 3-0. The proposed ordinance Bill 16, 2020 will be placed on the July 7th, 2020 council meeting agenda for first reading. Are there any other items for the Finance Committee to consider?
Not tonight, Chairman.
Thank you. And I want to thank Dr. Van Wert, Mr. Cologne, and Mr. Spurk for joining us. We are going to adjourn the Finance Committee, and we will have regular council at 7 p.m. Thank you.